The Panasonic LUMIX G2 goes to India, and I caught up with Gunther, my colleague, to hear more about his trip and the making of this documentary. Hi guys, I'm Johnny from CineD, and I'm here with Gunther, my colleague. Gunther, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Johnny.
Usually, people might know you from our lab tests and databases and everything that kind of connected to technical stuff. But this time, I would love to talk to you about something more creative. You've been in India twice, filming a wildlife documentary about wolves and foxes and flamingos and so on. And you just released this documentary, and I saw the quality and I was really blown away. You are a single person in the field doing such an amazing thing. So I wanted to catch up and talk to you about this specific project and find out a bit more how you did it. So first of all, why India?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I'm traveling quite a lot for work to all places, US, China, Asia, everywhere. And I usually always take a camera with me to just maybe find some time in the evenings to do a little side filming just for my hobby. But then while traveling to India, I realized that one of my dear colleagues, Barak Akluchka, which also is featured in the film, he brought me into this wildlife photography thing because he's a very avid wildlife photographer and he's very well connected to the Indian wildlife community. And so he asked me one time, why don't you stay over the weekend and I'll take you out. And so we went to a national park, an Indian national park, and I was completely blown away actually by the amazing nature, because when you travel to India, normally you see all these crowded places, the city bustling, the airports and everything. But out in the national parks, there's a side of India that you usually normally don't get to see on such a trip. And then, because he's so well connected, I talked to him, can we do some of the things that are not so touristy, that are maybe not even national parks, and do a story about that? And then he said, yeah, we have a very good chance, or there are actually a few places in India where you can do that. And this is why we came to Big One.
Before you leave to a documentary like this, to making it's a big project, do you run over your mind different scenarios, and according to that you choose what equipment you take?
Yeah, equipment is always a very critical question, because it's a business trip after all. Yeah, I cannot bring huge amount of gear with me, and also the typical scenarios that you're sitting in a Jeep or sitting in a small car, so you cannot bring like a huge tripod or something. So first and foremost, I'm talking about two cameras, but usually you bring one camera which is small, a long lens, a telephoto lens, and then some good audio equipment. And the difficulty is, of course, with a documentary, as you very well know, what length or what focal length will you actually need? Because you need something wide, you need something more for portrait shots, and then you need very long lens for the telephoto side. But actually here, you helped me, Panasonic helped me. I got this little LUMIX G9 II camera with the Leica lens, the 100-400 lens, and that was actually a very nice and small combo.
Of course, we helped you to get the camera, but why did you want to use the Panasonic G9 II to start with?
Yeah, the difficulty is to find a camera that has very good image quality, that is small, but that also has some features that you need for wildlife photography. Among them is you can use higher ISOs. That's typically not a strength like of Micro Four Thirds sensors. But the other thing is also high frame rates. And the LUMIX G9 II can do 4K 120 and even in 2K 240 frames per second. And that's amazing, of course, if you want to film birds taking off or something like that.
Which, of course, you did.
And it's not so easy to find all of that in a small package.
Sorry, you mentioned ISO. I'm a bit curious, because usually those Micro Four Thirds in general, unless it's really specifically specified, they're not so great in low light quality. So again, why did you mention ISO?
Basically, the issue you have is if you go with a very long telephoto lens, you're typically at an f-stop of f5.6 or even 6.3 with the Leica lens. And then if you use a teleconverter even, let's say a 2 times teleconverter, you end up at being at f13. And then you can imagine that even in the shadows, or if it is still dusk or dawn, that you need higher ISOs. And I could reliably use the LUMIX G9 II actually up to ISO 3200, sometimes 6400. And not much more is actually needed because anyway, if it's dark, what's the use of filming?
Did you film in a log picture profile, like a Vlog, or with embedded color already?
Yeah, that's one of the big advantages of the LUMIX G9 II. It has the full Vlog profile. And Vlog basically, on the one hand, is very well supported by all the major like applications like DaVinci Resolve or so. But also it intercuts nicely with the second camera that I had, the Panasonic LUMIX S1, the full frame camera. And I also shot that in Vlog, so it was absolutely seamless to switch between the cameras, get very much the same image, no tweaks needed to intercut between the two cameras. And so my setup basically was, I had the S1 with a wide angle lens for the landscape shots and sometimes also the portrait shots with a 50mm Canon lens, which I like very much on a full frame for portrait. And then I had on the small micro four thirds camera, the G9 II, I had the telephoto lens. And that also gave me an amazing reach, because if you consider a 400 lens with a 2 times teleconverter, with a 2 times crop factor, gives you 1600 of length. And for small birds, that's needed.
I think that's the real strength of micro four thirds, because camera size, that's kind of eliminated in the last years when you have other companies coming up with even full frames, very small bodies. But that crop factor here is really working well when you do a wildlife filming and photography. Okay, so you also filmed at night time with Vlog?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I always film it with Vlog. I tried other picture profiles at night time, but typically at night time you have very large dynamic range typically, because you have like bright windows and then you have the dark. And so I also find Vlog very suitable for that. I know that in the past with the 8-bit cameras, we were saying don't use the log profiles at nighttime shots, but I think this doesn't hold true anymore. Vlog all day long. An interesting observation I made on the LUMIX camera specifically, I shoot 5600 Kelvin, even if it is nighttime. I don't care. We leave it always on 5600 in Vlog. And it's very easy to adjust the ISO afterwards in post to get nice results.
What was the format itself that you shot? Did you because the camera cannot shoot ProRes internally, as far as I remember.
I always use the trusty Panasonic codec, which is a long op 150 megabit per second, 4K 422.
Not even all intra?
No, not even all intra, mainly because in wildlife, because all these cameras don't have a pre-record function. You sometimes focus on a bird, keep running, and then you hope that it will fly away or something like that. And then you only use the last 5 seconds. But it can happen that you wait for 10 minutes before this bird flies away. So this is why you need a very space-efficient codec. And the 150 megabit codec from Panasonic is really good. And it is very space-efficient. So no raw filmmaking or something in wildlife.
Gunther, and how do you deal with audio in those trips?
Yeah, sound is always a difficulty, and to be honest, I have not found a perfect solution yet, or one that satisfies my needs, because you have the issue, you sit in a car and the people around you are talking and they are also clicking photos. So basically you hear shutter sounds, you hear mumbling, you hear rumbling from the car, and then what you actually want is like the animal that is moving, and that is always difficult, I have to say, because a shotgun mic is the best solution here, of course, and what I'm using is a Rode VideoMic NTG, and probably that's as good as it gets in terms of size, because it is still rather small, and sound quality. But if somebody has a better solution, I'm all in to take it.
What about the interviews? Because in this documentary you have a lot of interviews with people. How do you deal with this?
Yeah, this was easy because here I used 2 lavaliers on the subject using the Rode Wireless Go 2 system. That's a very nice and simple setup, and it's also not very distracting for the people. Sometimes I had the issue that I could not put lavaliers on all the people, and then I had to rely on only one lavalier in the group. But the sound quality actually is rather good of the Rode VideoMic Go, so that's a very nice solution, and it's also very tiny and space efficient.
By the way, how many days did you spend in India altogether for that particular documentary?
Yeah, it was in total about 5 days. On the first trip it was 2 full days, and on the second trip it was 3 full days. So not a lot of time, and it's always it's always exciting because you go to a place with the intention to see some wolves or something, and then time drags on and you haven't seen it yet, and then you think, am I ever going to see it or not? But it always happens so far.
Actually, I don't think that so many people are really realizing that India is so full of life, like rich in wildlife, because when you usually think about, I don't know, Africa or South America, but in India, when I look at your documentaries, I see how much there is, and actually it's one of the places that probably not as crowded if you're looking for wildlife filming. And
exactly.
So it's a secret, we will not tell anybody. Let's talk about few of the scenes. One scene is when you have really small birds diving into the water in order to catch fish. And obviously you had to know where to wait for them. So how did you construct that specific sequence?
Yeah, that was very, very difficult because I have to tell you this, basically you see it in the film also, it was a hide like constructed. So we were sitting somewhere hidden, and then they had like a pool where some fish were swimming around. So it was sort of a constructed, but out in the wild, in the open, but a sort of a constructed place where they tried to attract kingfishers because they dive into the water and catch the fish. But the difficulty is, as you know, I was on the 1600 telephoto end in 4K 120, and you know the depth of field is razor thin. And you don't know where, on which location, the kingfisher will jump into the water to catch the fish. So I had big difficulties to getting it right. And I have to tell you, I did, I think over 8 hours, I did like 60 or 70 trials. And in the film, you see 3 scenes.
Wow.
So 3 out of 60 were usable. Were in the right spot, were in focus and everything. Also, the other problem here was, this is one of the drawbacks if you film with small cameras like a LUMIX G9 II, they start to overheat at one point. Because I had to keep it running at 4K 120 when the bird will drop. So after 2 minutes or so, the camera started to overheat because it was 45 degrees Celsius on the outside. And that's the drawback if you film with small cameras like that. Bigger cameras that have a cooling system and everything, then it works. So very often, I was hoping that in the first 2 minutes, the bird will drop.
And do you remember how long you had to wait, more or less, in order for the camera to cool down?
Then it took about 10-15 minutes to get back to normal temperatures. So that was one of the most difficult shots. But as you know, some of the more professional cameras have the pre-recording function. That would have been awesome here. No? You basically have the pre-recording running, and as soon as the bird drops, you hit the button and the last 3 or 4 or 5 seconds are recorded. But okay, fine. You live with the compromises that you have, and the advantage is that you have this small camera and you don't have to carry a lot of gear for that.
Another scene that really caught my attention was actually with the foxes. You have a beautiful, really so nice, so friendly over there. They're going away, they're coming back, and they have more family members next to them. How do you deal with the instinct to change the frame? Because you have to make a very quick decision what to follow, what is the center of attention now.
That's one of the difficult things in wildlife filmmaking, because, like, for instance, you see the scene where they all run away, like the mother and the 2 cubs behind her. And then the question is, which one do you follow? And you have to follow your instinct, sort of. If one stops, do you leave the camera there or you follow the other one? And yeah, sometimes you're lucky and sometimes not, but for a certain reason, I think you also develop a certain instinct how the animals are moving and where to follow. But it's also a lot about luck.
Obviously, you need a tripod.
No tripod.
No tripod?
No.
Everything is handheld?
No. Bird was the only one where I rented a tripod from an Indian gear rental because on the 1600 lens it is very difficult, of course, handheld. So on this one I used a tripod, but out of the vehicle, like the Foxes for instance, is without tripod. Here you just have like a bean bag on the window, so you can put it on the door, the bean bag, and then you basically try to very smoothly follow the action, but this is difficult on the long telephoto lenses. This is why I think a global shutter for wildlife would be very advantageous.
So while you were shooting, I mean, I guess you've been working with the stabilizer on.
Yes.
Panasonic do have good stabilizers, but the stabilizer want to stabilize and stay in a certain place, and you are kind of moving the camera. So how did this work exactly?
Yeah, this you're capturing exactly the difficult parts of it. Now the problem always is if you have the image stabilizer on, the first time you do a little movement, it will not follow. And then if you move further, then it follows very rapidly, and then it gives like an image jump. So I was always trying to very smoothly start a motion, and then eventually it would follow. But also some of the shots I had to additionally stabilize in post for image stabilization, like in DaVinci Resolve.
Was it difficult in DaVinci Resolve?
Yeah, sometimes I was not able to stabilize it because you would see the wobbling image edges if you stabilized it in post. So on some of the shots it worked, on others not. Then my decision is always it's better to have it a little bit shaky rather than having it smooth, but then the image edges are wobbling. But that is an issue, of course. But the good thing, the G9 II has a rather low rolling shutter in 4K 25 mode. It has, I think, was it 13.4 milliseconds? And that's quite good. That's quite good. So everything I would say below 16 towards the range of 10 milliseconds works quite well already.
And then, of course, I think it's one of the highlights of the movie because eventually you saw the wolf or the wolves. I mean, you were really looking for that particular animal, and on the way you met all the other beautiful scenery and animals. There's one shot when the wolf is running and you are escorting the wolf next to you. You're really both really very nicely synchronized. Tell me a little bit how you created this shot.
Yeah, the funny thing was we were following this alpha male along the tracks, and he got used to our vehicle, and that's one of the advantages. As you say, in India we were the only vehicle there, and obviously these animals sort of get used to the vehicles, and then he was behaving very naturally, and then at one point he came towards the camera and passed by, and then I told the driver, just go and follow him, but don't move in front of him or back, move next to him to the sides. And then we had this situation where both the vehicle and the wolf, we were driving next to each other, and I just used the camera on the 35 millimeter, meaning 70 millimeter field of view, equivalent lens focal length, and then we were just following next to each other, and I even had the camera on 24p, so it's not even like a slow motion or something, 24p, but it was so stable at that point that it was just a lucky shot.
But there is a point where you switch to high frame rate.
Yes. At one point I said, okay, it feels so natural and he's so close to us. I quickly switched to 120 frames per second, and then it was still following along. But it's funny, sometimes you have this lucky punch. Because normally you are lucky if you even see a wolf somewhere. But this wolf was really following the vehicle just next to us and wasn't even bothered. Unbelievable. I'm
always saying when you're filming in a car, you are only the operator, the one that is really in charge on the actual fluidity is the driver.
Yes.
And we know how it is. Sometimes they accelerate and they brake because they drive normally, not for our needs. So you always have to ask them specifically to be gentle, and you literally have to tell them how to drive in order that you can get the most out of it, because the last thing you want is this kind of movement forward and backward and so on. So that's why I was like, wow, the driver, or probably I can assume he's also a photographer, and maybe he had the feeling of how to help you to get the most out of those.
Well, you didn't see the first 30 seconds of it, where he was moving too fast. I told him, no, not so fast, stay next to him. No, you have to catch up with him, just stay next to him. So it took a bit of rearranging, but he's a photographer himself, yes. And so he very quickly understood what we need.
You actually ended up with very little B-roll or at all from this trip. Why is that? You're so busy concentrating on the actual film?
Yeah, I mean, B-roll, the issue is I always try to film, and that's the good thing about like a 100-400 lens. I always try to have both ends and switch between them such that you can cut. No? I typically feel that B-roll very often brings you out of the main subject. So if possible, I always try to avoid B-roll because it feels like, okay, now I had to insert it in order to be able to cut. So I always try to stay focused on the subject, and also in this film I have very long animal scenes, but I deliberately kept them there because it's how I would like to see a film. I would like to see an animal moving and following him, so I don't like to cut too quickly from one animal to the other. So.
How was it to deal with Panasonic's newly developed autofocus?
That's also a bit of a sore point. The issue is two things. The first thing, if I use the Leica 100-400 lens without the teleconverter, autofocus actually works surprisingly well, because then the maximum or the biggest aperture it has is 6.3, and that works. If I used it with the 2x teleconverter, you are immediately at f13, and then the autofocus was really struggling. But I can understand that because f13 you already get some unsharpness because of that, and then autofocus really struggles. That's the one thing, lens related, so don't use the 2x teleconverter, then you get rather reliable autofocus. The other problem is a little bit that, especially in wildlife photography, or filmmaking actually, it's difficult to get a clear shot of an animal. The animal might be behind a bush or something like that. And then of course the autofocus struggles because should it focus on the bush, should it focus on the animal which is behind the bush? And that's a difficult thing. And here with the Leica lens it was difficult to use manual focus because it's focused by wire. And I always don't get it right with a focus by wire lens. So of course there's some compromise, but I think it works better for photography because with photography you wait until you get a clear shot and then you do your shot. With filmmaking it's also nice if the animal moves behind a bush or something like that. No? And then you have to focus on the animal, and maybe the algorithms will learn it at one point that, okay, I'm interested in the animal and not the bush. But yeah, how should the autofocus know? For filmmaking I don't recommend to use autofocus actually.
But there are a lot of shots when the wolf or even the fox are coming towards you, so you would actually recommend using manual focus here?
I used manual focus for all of that.
But again, that was the Canon lens on the G9 II.
Yes, so I forgot to say that I used two lenses. The first time I brought the Leica lens, 100-400, where I used a lot of autofocus, and also a lot of the bird shots are with autofocus because they are clear. There's a clear shot, the bird is not behind a bush or something, and then it was focusing very reliably on that. But then for a lot of the wolf scenes, especially when we were in the dry season, I also brought my Canon 100-400 with an adapter to Micro Four Thirds. That worked very well because I could very reliably manually focus it, and the image stabilizer did still work with the adapter, so that was a good combination.
Let's summarize the filming part, and out of curiosity, I would like to ask you, what is the thing that you liked most in the LUMIX G9 II, and if you think, is there any reason for you to try the GH7 for such a project?
Yeah, actually, I really liked the fact it has Vlog, it has very nice quality 4K, and it has, according to my opinion, the best 4K 120 out of any camera in that price bracket. I don't know what LUMIX did, but the 4K 120 just looks gorgeous on this camera. You can even crop in a little bit and it still has very good resolution and everything. So that's a very, very strong point of this camera. I didn't use the GH7 yet, but I'm guessing it is very similar in quality. The, of course, advantage of using the GH7 would be you have now ProRes RAW internally, ProRes recordings available, but as I mentioned, for wildlife that's not so relevant. You need a codec that is very space efficient and still very robust. So I don't think the GH7 would bring any improvement. I was personally hoping for a better viewfinder on the GH7 because the G9 II has this 2.76 million dots viewfinder, and that's the same viewfinder found in the GH7. Maybe I'm spoiled from my LUMIX S1 because it has a 5.76 million dots viewfinder, and you really see the difference, especially when you try to manually focus. It makes a difference. So I'm hoping they bring this viewfinder also to the small Micro Four Thirds cameras.
I think we nicely summarized the filming part. Let's briefly talk about editing, which is, of course, it's very important, but it's all a matter of time. So you said you worked with DaVinci Resolve. How long did it took you some time to edit the whole thing, because it's a you had, of course, a lot of material. Any tips for jumping into such a project?
Yeah, I think the first thing is organization of your clips. I realized it quickly that because I had like 7 hours of footage, I need to organize my clips. And so I made a nice folder structure, bin structure in DaVinci Resolve, put all the clips there. And what I also realized for me at least, I'm a very visual guy. So what I do is I make multiple timelines from the different cameras and from different shots. And then I have one, like a final master timeline, which is the film. And then I always switch between the timelines and take the clips and copy them into my main timeline. Maybe that's anyway how somebody would work, but for me it helps because I have a visual memory, sort of. So I need to see the clips and I need to see the scenes in different timelines. That's the one thing. And what I really like is that DaVinci Resolve now is a very complete offering. You can have the audio part and polish up the audio. You can polish, of course, the color grading. It's all a one-stop solution. So I can highly recommend DaVinci Resolve. And it constantly develops. And one thing, because you mentioned audio before, there's a neat feature, maybe other editing programs have it as well. There's this voice isolation. So it's an AI algorithm that can extract the voice even if you have a lot of background noise. And that's superb. That saved a lot of shots.
It's amazing. I always compare it to what Adobe is doing, and Adobe has a long way to go before it matches what DaVinci can do. We use it in some of the trade shows. It's wonderful, especially if I'm alone in a trade show and I have to film myself with a microphone. It's amazing. Okay, and about music, I don't want to neglect the audio part, because there's a very nice music that we chose to accompany the video. Just how it was it you to choose the music, or anybody else helped you?
No, actually I did everything. No? I did the filming, the editing, the music choice, everything. For this film I was actually thinking I have two options. The one would be to use some Indian background music, and I found some nice pieces, but then I quickly realized that I needed about, 8 to 10 different pieces fitting all the different moods. And I simply couldn't find a catalog, maybe it's just my lack of knowledge, where I could pick and choose from a vast or rich library of Indian songs that are available. So then the second option for me was that I use classical music, orchestral music score for that. And here I resorted to Audio Network because that's, for me, a very good choice if you're looking for classical music. But there are many other choices out there, as we know.
If we have to summarize it all, because again, you're a single person in the field, 2 cameras, maybe 2 or 3 lenses, 1 or 2 audio devices, only one time with a tripod, everything else is handheld. And then, of course, editing your own footage, choosing the music, and the outcome is amazing. So first of all, congratulations. Last word of wisdom about projects like this from you. Anything that you can either encourage people to do or let them know, please do not do?
Actually, the last word of wisdom is about storytelling. Because I'm a technical guy, so I like to focus on the technical aspects of an image or the visuals and everything. But half of it is storytelling, and I only realized it after I came back already with all the footage. So I tried to make a story out of it, but think about the story all the way through. And a book that helped me a lot is Blake Snyder's Save the Cat book. It's on Amazon. And that was a really inspirational book that helped me also to organize the material according to a storyline that you can construct. So we always get lost in the technicalities of everything and the cameras and the gear and everything, you know, but at the end of the day, it's about the whole thing: storytelling, audio, visuals. And I at least have to learn a lot in terms of storytelling. That's what I can say. So I will focus on storytelling. That's my way forward.
The gear is only a gear. It's only a way to get to the story that you want to tell.
Gear is only a gear.
Gunther, thank you very much for your time. It was really a pleasure talking to you and really dive and understand a bit more about what you did. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlie.
And guys, thank you very much for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.